Good evening and welcome. I am Amarachi Obani. Tonight, President Muhammadu Buhari clears acting EFCC boss Ibrahim Magu and secretaries of the government of the Federation, Babachir Lawal, of corruption charges. Central Bank of Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee leaves all monetary rates unchanged. Students and staff of Nigerian Tulip International School, Isheri, Ogun State, regained their freedom after spending 11 days in captivity. And US President Donald Trump angers environmentalists by signing executive orders that support two controversial pipelines.
On Business News tonight, analysts ask Nigeria's central bank to create a more flexible currencies market as Monetary Policy Committee leaves key interest rates unchanged. On sports news tonight, Algeria coach Georges Lekens resigns after the team's early exit from the African Nations Cup.
And from Abuja, I'm Ivy Clem. The Nigerian Bar Association is set to review the regulation of legal practice in the country.
We begin tonight in the nation's capital, Abuja, where President Muhammadu Buhari today asked the Senate to reconsider its position on the appointment of Mr. Ibrahim Magu as the substantive chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. The president also asked the Senate to reconsider the case of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Engineer Babachir Lawal. In separate letters to the Senate, President Buhari explained that Mr. Magu has provided adequate explanations on the allegations against him, while Mr. Lawal was not given an opportunity to respond to the allegation of corruption against him.
On December 15 last year, the Senate rejected the nomination of Mr. Ibrahim Magu as chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission based on a security report from the Department of State Services.
Seek your approval to have an announcement.
Less than a month after that, the president has renominated Mr. Magu as the substantive chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. In a letter to the Senate, the president explains that relevant steps have been taken to clarify the allegations against Mr. Magu.
There is a need to maintain the current momentum and capacity of the EFCC since May 29, 2015. It is in the above context that I therefore request the gracious indulgence of this distinguished Senate to favorably accept my renomination, Mr. Ibrahim Magu Mustafa, for the position of the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, having received adequate clarification considering the matters relied upon by the Senate in arriving at its decision.
In a separate letter, the president also rejected the recommendation of the Senate asking for the removal of Engineer Babachir Lawal as the Secretary to the Government of the Federation over allegations of corruption. The Senate had alleged that Engineer Lawal abused his office by his involvement in a 200 million naira contract from monies meant for the internally displaced in the Northeast. But the chairman of the Senate Ad Hoc Committee on the Humanitarian Situation in the Northeast, Senator Shehu Sani, dismissed the president's response, describing it as a distortion of facts.
It is shocking to me that such a letter can come from the presidency with such default misinformation and outright distortion. What we did was a thorough job. We invited all the companies concerned. We invited the SGF, and he sent us the secretary of the presidential initiative on the Northeast.
Nevertheless, the committee was advised to consider the issues raised by the president in its full report, which is being expected.
Nigeria's central bank governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, says he expects the naira to stabilize while inflationary pressure is expected to reduce. Speaking at the first Monetary Policy Committee meeting for the year in Abuja, the Apex Bank governor explained that the bank will continue to come up with policies to strengthen the naira and increase the nation's foreign reserve, which currently stands at $28.9 billion.
Members of the Monetary Policy Committee at a meeting to inform Nigerians of how far the economy performed in the last quarter of 2016. and also proffer solutions to the shortcomings in the economy. First, the central bank governor gives an overview of the international market and how it has affected the domestic economy.
Chronically import-dependent consumption culture, lack of competitiveness of many sectors of the economy, and yawning infrastructural gap have combined with an unfavorable external environment to complicate the macroeconomic policy environment. The Monetary Policy Authority had on many occasions, and to the extent feasible, taken extraordinary steps to support other policies as well as compensate for aspects of structural gaps in the economy, even at the expense of its core mandate.
The Apex Bank governor also gave assurance of a more resilient economy for 2017. This, he says, will be driven by the agricultural sector and diversification of the economy.
Inflationary pressures will begin to subside as non-oil output recovers and Naira exchange rate stabilizes. Until then, it's stressed, a rate cut would worsen the inflationary conditions, stunt growth, and undermine the current outlook for stability in the foreign exchange market.
While many Nigerians look forward to a better economy this year, the central bank pledges to make foreign exchange available for manufacturers and other businesses.
To further discuss the MPC meeting today, I'm being joined on the news at 10 by the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rawani. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I appreciate the efforts you made this evening considering the traffic outside. So were you surprised by the MPC decision today?
No, not at all. The options are few and the choices are hard, so they were not going to do anything different. However, there's something that you have to take note of. The diagnosis as far as the central bank is concerned is that there's high inflation, there's reserves need to be, there has to be accretion of reserves, and also that the foreign exchange rate has to be stabilized. The real economic problems of Nigeria today is that there's a recession, which means there's a contraction in economic activity, there is high unemployment and high underemployment, and there's an erosion of confidence in the system. Nigeria needs to go and borrow internationally. Next week they're going on a road show. Therefore, the monetary policy diagnosis is totally different from what you call the broad diagnosis of the problem, which is both fiscal, monetary, and trade. Now, what needs to be done? Basically, in the end, are Nigerians going to wake up tomorrow and find that their lots is better? No. The parallel market traded at 498 this afternoon. The implied exchange rate in the interbank market is 305, but you will not get it. And you need to be allocated either because of raw materials or what have you. But these are good. They are good intentions. But the market structure and the market process needs to be refined to achieve that objective. So, but what was important though was that he made three commitments. One was that in 2017, he's going to move to an accommodative monetary policy stance, which means that interest rates will come down after achieving those objectives. Two, that M1, which is the narrow money, is going to be closely monitored because that is actually fueling inflation. If you look at the breakdown of money supply aggregates, M1 is a real culprit. And most importantly, in the guidance they gave, they did say, and they recognize that high interest rates is eroding the confidence, one, and two, the stability of the financial system. In other words, the banking system, the NPL ratios are going to increase because of high interest rates. And the central bank is going to be watching carefully to ensure that the banking system is carefully guided so that we don't have a systemic crisis. Those were the three mainly strategic comments that were made. But as far as, and to be honest with you, foreign exchange management is not a job of the Monetary Policy Committee. It is targeting inflation, making sure that you bring inflation and create a stable economic environment.
Wow. So why do you think the MPC made this decision at the end of the day? Because it sounds more like, they were between the devil and the deep blue sea. It was a catch-22 situation. There's really nothing they could have done about it.
No, that's why we say it's between a rock and a hard place. And like I said, the options were few, the choices were hard, and they couldn't have done anything better. But what is important to note is another thing. If you look at the slides that will come up any minute, there's what we call the inflationary gap. The inflationary gap is the difference between money supply and growth. That gap has increased. Money supply grew at 19%, while GDP grew at minus 2.26. So that gap is about almost 21%, whilst the recession gap is narrowing. So the chances are that Nigeria will go into a slow but painful recovery. However, inflationary pressures will continue to persist. And that is a very important dynamic. So if your objective is to actually contain inflation, your interest rate, your contractionary policy, and your rate hike policy is not achieving that objective. As a matter of fact, the central bank alluded to the fact and confirmed today that even the monthly inflation rate has started increasing. But I want you to note something, that the year-on-year inflation, the rate of difference has started declining, which means that to some extent, the policies are working. There are Greek support policies, the increase in production, and more than anything else, Nigerians are beginning to change their consumer preference to buying less of everything. Not that they're changing, moving to import to locally produced goods. That's a wish. But the reality is that because their purchasing power has dropped, then you are now beginning to see them buy. There's a contraction in demand, which is not so good for a recession.
If we continue like this into the end of, into 2017, what difference will it make?
No, let me tell you, the first quarter of 2017 is going to be a bit difficult. But as you go into the second quarter, you're going to see the early signs of a recovery. But one thing you must note, because there was an allusion to the accretion of reserves, the price of oil in January 2016 was $27. The price of oil in January 2017 is $55. The price of oil is 100% higher this year than it was last year. The question I ask you is that, do you feel 100% better off this year than you were last year? If the answer is no, and that is the answer to most Nigerians, then something is wrong with the way those foreign earnings are being deployed to the market. That's the question, because production has gone up now. Price is up, that means total revenue is up, and we have cut back on our imported fuel imports and all of that. So theoretically, we should be seeing that. And that is why in our note that we put out the other day, we talked about the illusion of prosperity and the frustration of misery coming at the same time. But what is going to happen is that in the second half of the year, second quarter in particular, some of these policies are going to be, bear fruit. And so both what the central bank is trying to achieve and what the fiscal authorities are working out will begin to see material differences. It will also coincide with the borrowing plan of the federal government, the austere plan of conserving foreign exchange by the central bank. Most likely, I suspect that there will be a reform of the market process. The central bank said it, maybe alluded to it. They have to reform that process so that the market becomes a market where there's effective supply of foreign exchange to all Nigerians at whatever price the market can bear.
Mr. Bismarck Rewani, once again, appreciate your comment tonight. Thank you for joining us on the News.
Thank you for having me.
In part two, after the break, a thunderstorm and heavy rainfall leaves one person dead, several property destroyed in Port Harcourt, the River State capital. Please stay with us.